All right, good afternoon. Welcome to the Deeper Dive. Dave Lochran, Adam Shaw, bringing you a disgustingly heinous, gruesome, brutal 10-game slate. Now, I don't kid, actually. I'm being dead serious. It's pitching, Adam, is not that bad. We're going to go game by game here. We're going to get into some strategy discussion, some ownership, and break down the plays and the positions that we think are best and worst. You look at pitching, it's not like pitching's nice. I think in today's deep dive that I wrote, it's on awesomemode.com. I think there were like 9 pitchers that I mentioned, maybe 10, of which I think 7 or 8 of them could legitimately be recommended. But then I got to positions. I even direct messaged you. I said, "Have you looked at this slate yet? Try to find a player that you love at each of the positions, and you're going to be hard pressed to do so."
Yeah, I mean, my list right now currently has 13 pitchers on it, and there are 18 pitchers on the slate. My list has 13, and of the 5 that I don't have, one is coming off the disabled list, one is an opener, one is John Lester, and 2 are just more expensive than I want to pay for. Like, there's not a single spot on this slate that I'm actually excited about hitters.
And full disclosure, you just hate John Lester, so that's why he's
Yep,
not on the list.
yep.
Right. It's rough, and we lost Jacob DeGrom, but with that postponement, we also lost potentially a few decent bats against Jeff Brigham.
Yeah, it's an interesting slate. I mean, I think we were talking about it before the show, and I'm still kind of going back and forth on what I want to do. But normally on DraftKings, I full stack, full 5-man stack, but then in most of my lineups, I'll have 3 one-offs because home runs are so important. But tonight, I'm leaning more towards, maybe some 5-3 or 4-4 stacks, even on DraftKings, just because there's just not one-off hitters that I like really anywhere, and it's more likely that there's just a couple of pitchers that have unusually bad performances, and you're going to want stacks against them. So I'm kind of leaning towards double stacks regardless of site tonight.
Yeah, this was a question that you posed to Josh and myself before we started streaming. You said, on a slate like this where there's no teams that you really love, are you better off stacking, even though it's a team that you're not hugely fond of, which we do that often anyway? Or do you just not stack, bunch of, just pick the best player at each position? But if you're doing that, you're not going to go through each position and be like, all right, so I really like this guy. I really like him. I really like him. I don't even know if there's one player at each position that you could say you love.
I
That's the
actually,
trouble.
yeah, no, I mean, like when I was going through games, I always go through by hand and just make a list of the guys that I really like, and maybe want to adjust a little bit to make sure I have like that I'm overweight on them. I basically just stopped writing down hitters because I realized I was just writing like anyone who had some semblance of value, not even guys
Yeah,
that I liked. So it's a lot of good pitching.
pretty much. Like when Logan Forsythe against J.A. Happ is in consideration, you
That is
know that
where
it's
that's
going to.
actually where I stopped writing when I
So
wrote down Logan Force. Like I was like, I'm done with this.
I I personally wish I could have stopped doing that in the deep dive, but didn't have that luxury. Like it was really one of those things. Let's just dive into it then. We'll go game by game here and pretty much provide the same analysis that we went over this afternoon. Jake Arrieta and Eric Fetty. Um, this is like one good spot on the slate, the Philadelphia Phillies. And the Phillies have just been one of the most unpredictable teams in the league. When they're not hitting homers, they're pretty much producing nothing. But Eric Fede has not been good against righties for his career. Yeah, granted, not a lengthy career at the major league level, a couple cups of coffee here. But at the same time, he has not been good. I mean, he allows a 442 WOBA, 261 ISO, and 2 3/4 home runs per 9 to righties across 113 batters faced for his career. Not very good. Not great against lefties either. Are the Phillies one of the few teams that you like a lot here?
A lot, no. I mean, I actually have interest in Eric Fede. I think he's pretty
Of
decent. I
course you
think that
do.
he'll be unowned. There are a lot of strikeouts in this lineup, and I expect him to be better against right-handed hitters going forward than his numbers indicate because he does have a slider now that has a 25% swinging strike rate against righties. That being said, though, out of the offenses on this slate, I do think both of these are actually pretty interesting ones because neither team has a great bullpen, especially the Nats is really bad. But also, it's a good park for home runs, and there are some reasonable price tags. Like Rhys Hoskins at 4,300, I think is going to be one of the highest owned hitters, but I think it's also just one of the better individual hitter plays on the slate.
Yeah,
So I'm
he
fine having a
should
good
be.
amount of Hoskins. Nick Williams actually grades out pretty well for me against Eric Fede. He's like the one guy on the team that does. And then Wilson Ramos, I mean, he's just one of the better hitting catchers. So I think that there is value in going to these Phillies bats, but it's still not a spot that I'm, overly excited about.
Yeah, it's tough to be, but relatively speaking, this is one of my favorite spots when compared to the rest of the slate. Another thing too, this is not the greatest battery either. Jay Garrietta and Wilson Ramos really doesn't scare me much. Uh, Interestingly enough, too, granted, I'm not big on BVP. Generally speaking, I'd like to see a much bigger sample size if I were to even reference anything. But Trey Turner's seen 11 plate appearances against Arrieta. He's got 4 stolen bases. That, given the sample, is a lot of swipes. If,
I
if
think they're
Turner
all in
gets
the same game.
on, what's that?
I think they were all in the same game.
I thought he
He
had 3 and then
it
1,
might
but
have
you
been
might be right.
because he's the reason that whole Miguel Montero thing happened with the Cubs, where Montero was asked after the game about letting Trey Turner steal 3 or 4 bases, and he said basically go ask Jake, and then
Yeah.
got cut the next day.
Yep. That's right. That's right. I didn't even think about that. You're right. Uh, but even if it was in one game, like Turner's going to run on Arrieta if he gets on. I have no doubt that that's going to be the case. And I don't mind him here. Shortstop again, not a position that I feel confident about. I don't mind Turner on the other side. Plus, he might not be a supreme power bat, but there are a few things when it comes to Arrieta that stand out. He is allowing a lot of home runs recently. He's allowed 2 home runs in each of his last 3 starts, and only one of them came at home. Coincidentally, was against the Washington Nationals. But you look at weather in this game. You say it's a good hitter park, and it is. 99% humidity at Citizens Bank Park today. So it might not be 100 degrees. It's not hot, but still very favorable hitter conditions.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Arrieta, he's another pitcher that I think is in play tonight. Just at his price point, he's really cheap, but he is one guy that I'll be going underweight on in tournaments just because I don't think he's significantly better than a lot of the guys around him, and I do think he'll be higher owned. Currently projected around 20% ownership last I checked. So he's someone I'm happy to go underweight on and leverage against a bit with these Nationals bats, just because it is a good park, it's decent hitting weather, and they are talented. I agree with you on Turner as a top shortstop play. Obviously, like Bryce Harper a lot as well,
Yeah.
but it's just a good Washington lineup against a pitcher who we know is at least capable of giving up some runs.
Yeah. Home runs have definitely been an issue recently for Arrieta, and I think the offensive production in this game could be pretty heavy from both sides. And that's not always the case when Arrieta's on the mound. It's not always the case when the Phillies are in play at all. But I do think this will be one that we see a lot of runs. And I think there's also ways to get easy bats in. I was hoping Asdrubal Cabrera would be in the lineup over Scott Kingery, but Hoskins, Williams, Santana, Ramos, that 2 through 5 there is pretty nice. Anything else on this one?
Nope. That's as excited as I'll get about talking about hitters today.
Yep, pretty much. And we've already got it out of the way early. So load blown early. Cleveland and Tampa Bay, Corey Kluber and Diego Castillo starting off this bullpen game for Tampa Bay. Corey Kluber, this is interesting because he was $2,400 cheaper than Jacob DeGrom on DraftKings. It was a massive discount, but now he's the most expensive pitcher on DraftKings. Conversely, on FanDuel, Kluber was $500 more than DeGrom, so you know that DeGrom's ownership was going to probably double Kluber's on FanDuel. And actually, Osimo before the game got scratched on Osimo.com. His ownership was projected at 40% on FanDuel, Kluber at 17%. You take DeGrom out of the situation, and it changes things dramatically on both sites, Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're going to see just a ton of ownership on Corey Kluber today, but I don't really think that I care. This is a slate where, because of how much I dislike so many hitters, I'm planning on going underweight on a lot of the chalk offenses, and that makes it so I can just load up on whatever pitching I like. And Corey Kluber, obviously, he's in a tier by himself on this slate with no DeGrom. And also, we've seen the strikeouts trending up a bit for him recently. Still not as excellent in that department as he was last season, but has been, a bit better. He goes into a good park in Tampa Bay. It's not a great Tampa Bay team, so I'm fine, playing a lot of Corey Kluber here and just differentiating elsewhere.
Yeah, so am I. And another thing too, Kluber looks a lot more like Klubot lately. Wouldn't you
Yep.
agree? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yep.
yeah, like first of all, just his last two starts, 18 strikeouts across 13 and 2/3 innings. I love it. One of them was against the Rays. I really did like the discount from the Grom on DraftKings, but it doesn't matter. But how about this? Like over his last four starts, and you and I talked about this a lot this year. His swinging strike rate was down a lot from last year. It's up to 14.6% over his last four starts. That I like to see that a lot. I like to see that his K rate's above 30%. And how about this? I'm sure you've noticed it, but his cutter is gaining way more whiffs than it was earlier in the season. And that's a pitch that he uses liberally against lefties and righties. The cutter right now has been nasty. Wasn't getting the whiffs per swing, whichever you prefer, against either side of the plate as much. Now it's really, really working. He's got it on a rope. And I think the Kluber is just in a fantastic spot. But I think we'd both agree the ownership now, especially with the Grom out, is going to be markedly higher than it would have been.
Yeah, all the stuff you mentioned on Kluber, obviously, really good points, and just more of a reason why I don't want to take a stand fading Kluber. It's always tempting when you get a pitcher up at like 60% ownership to just go a different direction, but the way this slate breaks down, like there's no clear pivot at the top in his price range. And if you go down to a pitcher who, isn't quite as good as Kluber, what are you actually gaining? Like you're going to get some expensive bats in your lineup that you don't even really want. So I'm more interested in playing a ton of Kluber and then differentiating a hitter and differentiating with my SP2 options.
All right. Kluber, by the way, his projected ownership on DraftKings was 42% prior to the Mets delay. What do you think it's at now?
I'm looking at it. It's at 61.
61%. That's insane for 10 games.
Um,
I
Well,
Go
so I
ahead.
guess one more thing on him, and Josh and I talked about it this morning. I think it is a case where you will also, if you are concerned about ownership being that high, I think it's a case where you can kind of decide tournament by tournament. Like in cheap tournaments, I think it's kind of likely you end up getting him at like 45% or something. But then if you're playing like the $400 on DraftKings or whatever it is, that he's, closer to like 80%.
I think so too. FanDuel went from 17 to 22. I think that's reasonable, being that it's a one pitcher site. What about hitters from this game? I mean, we're not targeting Tampa bats. We really don't know. I mean, we can get a good idea of who's going to be on the mound for Tampa Bay, but with Kevin Cash, you're never certain. What do you make of this matchup for the Cleveland Bats?
Yeah, I mean, last I looked, it's supposed to be Jalen Beeks, but obviously that can change.
Right.
But yeah, so I mean, I'm not really excited about Cleveland because the whole bullpen thing's pretty good. Jalen Beeks in Tampa Bay is not a guy that I love targeting against. But I do think that the price tag on Jose Ramirez is nice. I think the price tag on Encarnacion is nice. And from a stacking perspective, I don't mind being overweight on Cleveland here just based on talent. I mean, we've established that we don't love matchups for really any team on this slate. So now I kind of just want to take as much low owned, high ceiling, very talented hitters as I can. And Cleveland does give us that.
I think so too. But outside of that, it's more so just I don't want to say a leverage spot, but just most talented bats on a slate type of spot.
Yeah, and that's pretty much how I'm approaching this slate. If you're a good hitter and you're not one of the teams that everyone's gravitating to, then I'm playing a good amount of you.
Yep. I cannot tell you how many times in today's article I said, well, it's not the greatest spot, but I'm willing to just rest on pure talent here, like just raw
Right.
talent and hope that it works out. We'll get to that when we get to the Cubs, which we'll do right now. Cubs in Milwaukee. Uh, I know you have some interesting tidbits on Wade Miley. I almost pulled a Dan Strafford there. Wade Wiley.
Made Wiley.
Wade Miley. But I can't help but look at Chris Bryant's salary on DraftKings, and I can't ignore 4,300. I can't ignore Javi Baez's talent, lack of strikeouts against lefties, power against lefties. Um, but I'm curious to see what you have to say about Miley here, because I know that you have a few interesting tidbits on the southpaw.
Yeah, I mean, I am still interested in Javi Baez. Obviously, Chris Bryant's pretty cheap, but I expect Bryant, at least at that price tag, to probably be the most popular Cubs hitter. But what
Yeah.
stood out to me about Miley, and I'm actually going to make sure that I have some of him in tournaments. Obviously not going to be a core play for me, but it's pretty easy to get overweight on a guy that nobody's playing, so I will be doing that. He's been pretty good this year, especially against righties, but even better of late. For the season, he has a 283 expected WOBA against right-handed hitters, just a 102 expected ISO. But if you look at what he throws to righties, he's basically been throwing 5 pitches this year: his cutter, his changeup, his curveball, a 2-seam fastball, and a 4-seam fastball. 3 of those pitches have expected WOBAs of 271 or less and expected ISOs of 100 or less. And then 2 of them have been getting hit pretty hard. Over his last 4 starts, he's essentially stopped throwing the 2-seamer and the 4-seam fastball, the 2 pitches that have been hit hard, and increased his usage on each of the other 3 pitches, which has, over those 4 starts, one against the Cubs, one against the Reds, one against the Pirates, and one against the Cardinals, he has struck out 25% of right-handed hitters. He's walked 2.8%, a 2.66 xFIP, 257 WOBA, 233 expected WOBA, 13 and a half swinging strike rate. So he's been really, really good against righties over this stretch since he basically just started throwing curveballs, changeups, and cutters, and getting more swings and misses, getting more strikeouts. I think that it's a spot that, like, I still kind of question the raw point upside just because the Cubs don't strike out a lot. But when I can get, 10% of a pitcher like this and then go a little bit underweight on the Cubs, I think it's a spot that I want to do so.
All right. I get it, but there's one or two other guys that I think will be probably equally uh, unpopular that I'm probably going to pivot to at a similar price point. But I get it. I mean, I will say also though that Javi Baez is just like the thing that interests me about Baez is he he's always been known as a free swinger, free swinging power bat. But you look at the guy's numbers; he has a 16% strikeout rate against lefties. Like
Yeah.
for
Baez is
us,
clearly my favorite Cub play.
oh yeah, and he should be. But I do think just because of the salary on DraftKings specifically, and you mentioned Chris Bryant should be popular for sure. At 4,300, another weak position. They're pretty much all weak positions. Bryant does stand out as a pretty decent play.
Yeah. And so I guess while we're talking about it, just to put everything in context, because I mean, I agree with you that there's a lot of other pitching. Sean Newcomb, as long as he's projected to be one of the highest owned pitchers on the slate, is going to be a guy that I go underweight on. Him and Arrieta, I'm planning on going, underweight and then increasing my exposure to other guys in that price range, which lets me get, more of Miley. So there's going to be a few pitchers where, I say that they're not a core guy, but that I am making sure that I'm overweight on them. Those are the 2 guys that I'm sacrificing in order to do that.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, just knowing right now that Arrieta is projected to be above 20%, that's hard for me to stomach. And you know why? I know that he's not expensive. Uh, and I know that when I say, well, the guy just has no strikeout stuff this year, someone's going to say, yeah, but he struck out 11 last time. All right, last time, fine. Yeah, he did against the Marlins. But you take Jake Arrieta's pitching on the season, and you start seeing some troublesome trends. I'll give you one for example. When you look at swinging strike rate, Adam, Jake Arrieta, where do you actually? I won't even ask you where. Jake Arrieta has the fourth lowest swinging strike rate in the league behind Bartolo Colon, Andrew Kashner, and Alex Cobb. Like, that's not the company you want to be in. So I'm not saying Arrieta can't have a decent game today, but if he's going to be as popular as he is, you can just count me out. I don't see Arrieta being in a spot, particularly against this Washington team with the 100% humidity in a favorable ballpark for hitters. I don't see him being in a spot where he can hurt me if I don't play him.
Right. I mean, it's not a spot where I'm fading it like, oh, Jake Arrieta is a terrible pitcher. It's just
Oh,
when you have a bunch of guys that have very, very similar ranges of outcomes, I think it's a profitable strategy to every day just be essentially taking the field and taking, the handful, getting overweight on the handful of guys that nobody's interested in at expense of the groupthink guys like Jake Arrieta.
exactly. All right. Anything else from this one? Milwaukee, Chicago. Any bats from the Brewers? I know Ryan Braun is a guy that we generally like to target against lefties, and you're not a big John Lester guy.
Yeah, Ryan Braun's one of the few one-off hitters I actually legitimately like on this slate. So I like him quite a bit, and Milwaukee's another team that I will have some exposure to as stacks because I don't think John Lester's that good, and I don't think anyone will go to Milwaukee. And I'm not playing John Lester, which on a slate like this, any team that I'm not playing the pitcher, I'm gonna stack them just because I don't feel great about anyone.
Right. Yeah, I will happily pass on John Lester as well. All right. How about New York Yankees and Minnesota? We've got Kyle Gibson and J.A. Happ. Kyle Gibson is the guy that every start, I'm like, his stuff's really good. One day he's not going to let me down. Like one day, Kyle Gibson is going to toss a gem. And I've gotten one from him this year. I did. It was against the Tampa Bay Rays, and he was brilliant. 8 one-run innings, 9 Ks, 35 fantasy points. And then since then, it's been all downhill from there. It's interesting too because his ERA is at like 3.74, right? It's not like he gives up a ton of runs, but he gives them up at the most inopportune times. And I found something interesting because you know how you and I have discussed Kyle Gibson at length all year long. His slider has one of the highest swinging strike rates in the league. So does his curveball. His changeup gets 30+% swinging strikes. His all speed and secondary stuff is really, really good. But I read something the other day that made me think, interesting. You know how I always complained about him throwing too many two seamers in 2-strike counts?
Yeah,
Well, no pitcher in the league throws more fastballs with runners on base than Kyle Gibson this year.
that's interesting.
Very interesting. And generally speaking, you start to see a lot more breaking stuff or off speed stuff when runners are on base. Not Kyle Gibson. He just loads up on the two seamer. But
Got to
he's
get those
got
double play balls.
exactly, and that's exactly what he's looking for. Get a ground ball, but he does it with runners on third too. It's maddening. But anyway, Kyle Gibson should see a lot of ownership against him with this Yankees team. Second highest expected run total, 4.8. It's not that high. And then J.A. Happ on the other side, relatively affordable on DraftKings. 10-4 on FanDuel is a little bit more difficult to stomach. Where are you going with this game?
Yeah, I think this one's really interesting because Gibson is more expensive than I would ideally like to pay for, but I expect the Yankees to be one of the highest owned stacks. So rostering Gibson in non-Yankee lineups does have,
Yep,
merit. If he goes out there and, racks up a bunch of strikeouts, you just have such a leg up on the field.
I
And
agree.
then even beyond that, if you're looking to roster the Yankees or stack the Yankees, especially if you're like a single entry or a 3 max guy and you want to go to the Yankees, but you also want to differentiate somehow, it's a spot where I think you can and you can feel, kind of good about it. We talked about how good Gibson's slider is. And if you look at two of the Yankees who figure to be, two of the highest owned hitters on the slate, you have Andrew McCutchen and Giancarlo Stanton. McCutchen against right-handed sliders this year has a 231 expected WOBA, and Stanton has a 273 expected WOBA with a 32.5% swinging strike percentage. That's not to say that he can't hit a home run on a mistake slider or on a different pitch, but when you're talking about a guy that is probably going to be 25 to 30% owned against a pitcher like Gibson, who definitely has the tools to make him look pretty stupid, I think that you can stack the Yankees and maybe skip Stanton or skip McCutchen or skip both, or just do something within a Yankee stack to be contrarian without having to fade the entire team.
Exactly. I put a risk pitcher in the deep dive each day, sometimes more than one. Today it was Kyle Gibson because you're seeing ownership projected on Gibson around sub 1%, sub 1% on DraftKings, and on FanDuel a little bit higher, predominantly because he's a little bit less expensive. I think he's at 7% at 6,700, but I think there's merit to it. I really do. And another thing, I will lose my mind if Gibson has Stanton in an 0-2 count and throws him a two-seamer.
Yeah, it's gonna be so maddening to watch.
Oh,
One guy that I think so on the flip side, if you're not stacking the Yankees, but you wanted like a one off or something, Miguel Andujar, outside of Sanchez as a catcher, obviously is a good play, but Miguel Andujar, limited sample size, obviously, but against right-handed sliders this year, just a 369 expected WOBA and just an 18% swinging strike rate, which isn't that high against same-handed sliders. He also hits right-handed curveballs well, so he's shown he can hit breaking balls. And those are the pitches that Gibson generally goes to get swinging strikes. So I think Andujar is someone that I would like to be overweight on, while I'd like to be underweight on Sanchez or Stanton and McCutcheon.
okay, I like it. And I'm on the same boat there. Going to have a little bit of Gibson just because on a slate like this, people are definitely going to be attracted to Yankee bats, even if it's a decent pitcher in Gibson. And I really do believe Gibson's a decent pitcher. He's let me down um, more than he hasn't, but he still has good enough stuff to go out there and give you 8 strikeouts or so and put up solid numbers. He just needs to, God, just throw the off speed stuff, man. Throw the slider, throw the curve, mix
Just
the
be
change.
Patrick Corbin.
What's up?
I said just be Patrick Corbin.
Just be Patrick Corbin. Exactly. I'd be very happy if he decided that he was going to try and be the right-handed Patrick Corbin. I'd be okay with that. How about Minnesota bats here? I mentioned, the self-loathing nature in considering somebody like Logan Forsythe, but it's it's on the table. Is there any interest here in the Forsythes or the Garvers of the world against J.A. Happ?
Not happily, but yeah, he's 2,900 and hitting third. Garver is 3,300 hitting fifth. Even Astudillo, where he has catcher eligibility on DraftKings, is 3,100. Not a great hitter, but he literally does not strike out and does not walk. And whenever you can roster someone at a cheap price tag that's going to hit the baseball, then I think there is a little bit of upside, even if it's not in the form of home runs. So yeah, I mean, I think those three guys are okay, but that's about it.
All right, sounds good. How about we move on here, talking a little bit of Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Trevor Williams. Uh, Trevor Williams isn't very cheap, so it would be hard for me to consider him, but I'm just not huge on picking on the guy either. He's holding righties to a 244 WOBA and a .064 ISO over the last 2 months. Over the last 2 months, decent sample there. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You got 6 righties in the lineup today. I think you could still make sense of a Carpenter or an Adams, but I will ask. Trevor Williams has also done a pretty solid job of limiting the long ball this season, and I don't know how much upside you have in going against somebody like Williams, who might not be the highest upside righty, but generally doesn't have many blow up tendencies.
Yeah, I'm with you. He's been really good lately, and he's one of the guys that I said I didn't have on my list of pitchers simply because of his price. I don't really see value in paying 9K for him, but I don't love bats against him either. You mentioned you can go to Carpenter, Adams, even Ozuna's been, so good lately, or really all season long. He just was unlucky at the beginning of the year. And those guys have upside, but it's just not a really exciting spot against a pitcher who I think is pretty good in Williams. So yeah, I don't feel too great about it.
Neither do I. What about the other side? Adam Wainwright back on the bump, making his first major league start since May 5th or 13th.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Wainwright was pretty decent over his rehab starts in the minors, got up to 90 pitches in his last start. So I don't love the spot for Pittsburgh, but I will be stacking them just because I don't expect other people really to do it. They're very reasonably priced. It is a ballpark upgrade for their hitters. And we still don't know what to expect from Adam Wainwright coming back and facing major league hitters for the first time since May. It's not like Wainwright has a track record over the last couple seasons of being consistently dominant or anything. He's gone through stretches where he is, but he's also gone through stretches where he gets absolutely lit up every time he's on the mound. So I just think from a low owned upside perspective, there's value in going here. It's also a pretty good Pittsburgh lineup. It's missing Gregory Polanco, which sucks, but you still have, Frazier, Marte, Cervelli, Dickerson, Moran in the top 7 spots. So I will have some Pittsburgh stacks.
Wainwright struck out 23 batters in 16 innings since August 13th in these rehab starts. But I think it can be a little bit misleading given that, he pitched 1 inning, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. But even when he threw 5 innings, he struck out 7. So, yeah, kind of interesting there. Wainwright, he had the strikeout stuff working for him there. Granted, I don't expect it to translate into solid fantasy production with the Cardinals, but it's at least interesting. That's all.
Yeah, it's
And
enough to make me not be like jumping up and down to get to the Pirates.
exactly. I think it's really that simple. Yeah, it doesn't get me excited, but at the same time, I'm not necessarily um, I'm not feeling like Adam Wainwright is expected to get just torched here either.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. We will see what happens. And plus, in terms of just hitting conditions and everything, Bush Stadium, it's around like 70 degrees, nothing crazy. So nothing there that jumps out. When it's hot in St. Louis and humid, that park turns into a launch pad.
Yeah, they basically get like the same weather that we get here with the heat and humidity, where in the summer it just the ball flies.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm in the Philly area, and it's been like 50, mid 50s, low 60s the past couple of days. It's completely changed around. Um, I will again though, like a Matt Carpenter or a Matt Adams. Given the lack of depth on this slate, I don't mind those guys, but I just don't have much interest in targeting Williams with right-handers. And I guess you really have the same approach with Pittsburgh bats. Given the lack of depth, you don't mind Pittsburgh against the guy who's making his first start in 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Kansas City, and this is a fun one. Kansas City and the White Sox. Junis and Lucas Giolito. Um, Adam, we've talked a lot about Giolito, who really had turned things around. You know, his K rate was up, his ground ball rate was up, his changeup looked outstanding, and then when everyone kind of buys into it, he gets lit up by the Detroit Tigers at $6,300. Now he's $4,700 against Kansas City. Um, I will point out Giolito has allowed the second most stolen bases in the league. So if you like speed on the opposite side, if you can find any like a Whit Merrifield, that doesn't hurt. And then in the opposite end, Junis has stopped allowing home runs lately. I'll let you dive deeper into the analysis.
Yeah, this is a game that I really have interest everywhere just in terms of upside. When I first looked at the slate, I assumed I would have like 100% Giolito at 4,700. But with the way the slate breaks down, I won't simply because I don't need to.
Unnecessary. Yeah.
Right, but I still will have a ton of Giolito. I expect him to be my most popular SP2 because I don't really have any negative takeaways from that start against the Tigers. His velocity looked fine. His movement on his pitches still looked good. He was just behind in more counts than usual, in part because it appeared he was getting squeezed during the game. He also allowed an 800 batting average on balls in play, which is going to make anyone look bad. There really just wasn't anything from that start that overrides what we saw from him the previous few, where he had made changes that legitimately looked good, and we expect to continue moving forward. So I'm still thinking that he's a pitcher that should be around $8,000, and he's currently 4,700. So I like him a lot here, and it's not a Kansas City offense that's particularly scary. That being said, though, there is upside in Kansas City because obviously any pitcher can have a bad game, and that goes for Giolito as well. But also, like you said, he struggles to hold runners, and you have Whit Merrifield and Adalberto Mondesi at the top who are going to run at will. Alex Gordon can steal, so that's three guys at the top of the order that have stolen base upside. So I do think that there is merit to stacking Kansas City here for that upside, in addition to the fact that Giolito will be one of the higher owned pitchers, so you get leverage. And then on the other side, Jake Junis is someone that we've always bought into his strikeout upside. He's kind of like Gibson in that he has a good slider that gets a ton of swings and misses. He just doesn't really have any other good pitches. So if he gets behind the Callister, doesn't have his command, he can be home run prone. I'm not, going to write that off just because he's coming off of a couple of good starts, but I still, the upside's there, the risk is there. So I don't love his price tag at 8,500, but against a White Sox team that I expect to have ownership because of their prices, I don't mind going to Junis as a leverage play. I don't mind going to the power hitters here like Moncada, Abreu, Palka, Delmonico, Castillo. I think are all pretty decent value options from the White Sox. So whether it's pitchers or hitters, I expect this to be a game where I have some of my highest ownership.
I think me as well. I was surprised to see 47 on Giolito. Like 63 last start, I thought, okay, well, they're finally starting to come around, and then he just dropped back down to 47. Right now, though, on Awesemo.com, we have his ownership around 27% on DraftKings. It's quite high.
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed that his price tag dropped because I wanted his ownership to be down coming off that start.
And you'd have played him at like 7K,
Yep.
right? Yeah.
Yep.
There's still a lot. There's still a lot to like here, but I like Whit Merrifield quite a bit. The guy's got 31 stolen bases on the year. He's leading off. Um, it's just it's too favorable a position not to like here. It would have been nice if Kevin Smith was catching, but outside of that, or actually hell, Wellington Castillo was catching as well. That would have been fine, but he's been DHing a lot. I don't think having Narvaez behind the mound is enough to get you off of base stealers though.
No, not at all.
All right, anything else from this one?
Nope.
All right, Colorado, Arizona, your favorite, Herman Marquez. Oh man, coming off another sexy start against San Francisco at Coors Field. Coors Field has done nothing to curtail his production. He's just been outstanding. But I am interested to get your take here because Peralta is back in the lineup. So and Avila's in the lineup today. So you have one, two, three, you have four lefties. His K rate is markedly higher against righties. He's been a lot better against righties. And you have five of them in the lineup tonight, including the pitcher. But at the same time, some of these lefties, like Avila, have not been particularly good. Talk to me about Herman Marquez.
He's really, really, really good at pitching. But yeah, I mean, he's still someone that I like here, even though he's pitching in cores. I will have, a pretty decent amount of him just because I buy into his stuff. He's got a hard fastball, he's got a good slider, has a good curveball that he has cut back his usage on, especially in cores games, which is nice to see. Even in that last start against the Giants, went back and looked, and his slider usage was down from where it had been in previous starts, but it wasn't because he was throwing his curveball more. He simply was throwing his fastball close to 70% of the time in that particular spot. That particular start where he was still very effective. His fastball velocity actually was up a little bit. So I'm still very happy with what we're taking away from Marquez starts, in that it appears he's made a change in his pitch mix that should make him more effective in Coors Field and lead to him not having the exaggerated home road splits that we've seen earlier in the season. So I do like him here. It's not an easy Arizona lineup. It's with Pollock in, with Peralta in, 1 through really 6 are pretty decent hitters, and then you get a bunch of strikeouts with Avila and the pitcher. But just based on talent and a price tag that I think is much lower than his talent level, I like Herman Marquez.
Yeah, so do I. I don't. If you need a shortstop, you're not playing Marquez. Or a third baseman. I do think Eduardo Escobar is a perfectly fine play here.
I agree.
Um, but aside from that, I have a lot of respect for Marquez. I mean, how would you not have a lot of respect? Since June 30th, that's 12 starts, 5 of them have come at home. You got a 240 xFIP, a 32% K rate, 14% swinging strike rate, and he's still getting 51% ground balls. Very seldom do you see something like that. You don't usually see 30+% strikeouts and 50+% ground balls. He's in rarefied air. And at Coors Field, that helps him a lot. But what I also like is that he's someone that, when he comes back to Coors, Adam, can decrease that curveball usage and mix in the other secondary pitches that he has, the other off-speed stuff, which have been very good as well. He's not strictly reliant on the curveball, and I think that's one of the reasons we still see him get strikeouts while decreasing curveball ownership at Coors Field.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the stuff's just really, really good, and he's finally putting it all together.
Yeah. By the way, the Diamondbacks against righties this year, they haven't been that good. Their active roster has a top 10 K rate, a bottom 8 weighted on base average. Like, there's no doubt there's power in this lineup, but I think even at Coors, Marquez is underpriced at $9,000. So
I agree.
that's my
Yeah, I
take.
mean, I would have more Marquez if there were better hitters on this slate because I would be pivoting to him off of Kluber. But with the
Right.
lack of really good hitters, I'm still just playing a bunch of Kluber.
The spots that I'm finding myself going with Marquez is where I'm like taking a risk on a Kyle Gibson. And I have like a 9K and an 8K pitcher in there.
I also think with some of the cheaper teams, you can get to Kluber and Marquez.
Yeah. Yeah. I've tried with certain, it's like with the Phillies, they're not crazy expensive, but it's difficult to do unless you're just punting everybody else because they're all in that like low to mid 4K range. Um, I would think you're probably right that some teams it's very doable. One of them would be Kansas City, outside of Mondesi and Whit Merrifield, these guys are all pretty. Salvador Perez is overpriced, to be honest with you. I don't know. What teams do you think you could fit those guys in with?
You can do it with the White Sox. You can do it with certain Cubs if you skip at least one of Baez or Rizzo. Um, Pirates, you should be able to do it with. Phillies, if you play like a Michael Franco or something, like Franco Williams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I
Or
mean, you
Kingery, but
can.
that's disgusting.
What'd you say?
Said or Kingery, but that's just disgusting.
Yeah, I wasn't even going to mention him. But yeah, so I mean, I think there are some teams you can do it with.
Yeah, I think so. Zach Godley on the mound for Arizona. It's been a rough go for Zach Godley this year. He'll go out there and he'll have a great start, and then he'll struggle, and then he'll have a great start, and then he'll struggle, and then he'll have a decent start, and then he'll struggle. We've seen a lot of that from Godley this season, and it's not like he's been a lot worse at Chase Field. He just has not been he has not been dominant, and I think some of that kind of makes sense when you look at his repertoire. Like, we're talking about a guy who leans heavily on that curveball. And by heavily, I mean, he's throwing the curveball 41% of the time. He doesn't throw a four seamer. So he's basically, sinker, cutter, curve. And when the curveball doesn't have, when the curveball is not working for him, he just doesn't really have anything else to lean back, to fall back on. And coming into Coors Field as a predominant 41% curveball pitcher, it's like the last thing you want to be as a pitcher coming into Coors.
Yeah, but surprisingly, he's actually had success there.
I know. I
Over
think it might be the his curveball movement's a bit different. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean he's made 3 starts there since last season. One was this year. He had a 19% swinging strike rate. September 3rd last year, 13.3%, and June 22nd was at 16.8%. Very effective in all 3 of those starts from a DraftKings points perspective. So it is a risky spot. I will certainly have my share of Colorado hitters, but Godley's another guy who, if you're going to talk about Sean Newcomb being 25% owned for $900 more than like a 10% owned Godley, I will gladly have more Godley than that, and be overweight on him just based on talent and again his leverage, because we know people are going to roster the Rockies in Coors Field. So if Godley does pitch well, you're getting the added bonus. So it's a spot where I'm playing both sides, but I will be overweight on Zach Godley.
Yeah. Well, all right. I probably won't be.
The price
Maybe
tag's
it's
just so cheap on DraftKings.
maybe he just has success there because he literally falls on his face after every pitch, and it just confuses the shit out of hitters.
And to
I
be
don't know.
clear, like I'm not saying I'm playing Godley because he's pitched well in Coors. I'm just saying that he has pitched well in Coors, but it's more so that he's $6,400, and that clearly is factoring in that he's pitching in Coors, and so it gives some excess value.
Yeah, agreed. By the way, I had his curveball wrong. It is 12-6. For some reason, I was thinking of it differently. It's definitely like the bottom falls out of this pitch. So, generally speaking, it's something that probably shouldn't be good at Coors Field, but he has been. So who knows? I'd like to see the pitch usage there to see if the cutter usage increases a lot at Coors. But yeah, I mean, I don't hate it. I'm not really super interested in Godley, but that is a really, really, really discounted salary.
Yeah, and for
Really
whatever
cheap.
it's worth, the start he made there a month or so ago, he threw his curveball 39%.
So basically in line with the season.
Yep.
All right. Well, there you have it. How much Godley do you have?
I'll probably have around 15 to 20%.
15 to 20. All right. Fair enough. Emac says Lavi Junis has just allowed 3 home runs in his last 9 starts. What a turnaround. Yeah. It is insane because Junis has been crushed by the home run this year. And when he's not getting tagged for home runs, he's an entirely different pitcher who can get strikeouts around 26% Ks against righties. I think Junis is perfectly viable today too, which is another reason why I'm just not very high on hitters. The only thing is you have 5 lefties in the top 6 of that lineup, so a little bit less enticing, but I digress. Texas and the LA Angels, Adam, Mike Minor, Jaime Barria. Go ahead, man. What do you got here?
It's another game where I don't like hitters very much.
Yep.
So Jaime Barria, I will have. He's one of the guys that I'll be pivoting to a bit of my Sean Newcomb, just because he's going to be like 1/10 of the ownership, I think, and he's a better pitcher than people give him credit for. He matches up well with this Texas team that has strikeouts in its lineup. They only have 4 lefties in there today, but he's been getting more swings and misses lately against righties as well, throwing his slider. You have guys in here in Chirinos and the Shields that'll strike out a lot from the right side. It's a good park. He just carved this team up the last time he faced them last week. So he's a guy that you don't need a ton of exposure to him to be overweight on the field, and I'm going to do that. That being said, I mean Shin-Soo Choo's really really cheap, and he's a good hitter. Joey Gallo obviously has a lot of upside, so I don't mind those guys. But Texas isn't one of the teams I plan on really having much exposure to. And on the other side, obviously you have the super talented outfield for the Angels. I love Mike Trout. I like Calhoun. I like Otani a lot. The thing for me though is that Miner's actually made some improvements lately, throwing his changeup more, getting more swinging strikes against righties, and not allowing much production against him. Over the last month or so, a 234 expected WOBA against right-handed hitters for Mike Miner. So not a spot that I'm overly excited about. Obviously, I'll take the talent of those outfielders and I'll still play them, but it's just yet another spot where I think the ballpark and a pitcher who's better than people give him credit for makes me not all that excited.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna give you my problem with Berea though. I had I think 20-25% of Berea last start, and that was at Globe Life Park. I mean, the conditions weren't exactly favorable, but he was also $6,000 flat. The problem I have with Berea, and he threw 5 pitches, scoreless, only 2 hits, 79 pitches. He has not gone above 86 pitches in 5. Uh, he's 92 pitches has been his max. His pitch count is so limited. I mean, not that I get it. It's not saying that like, all right, Berea is gonna only throw 79 pitches, but he had 5 clean innings and got yanked with 79 pitches in a game where there's no pinch hitter. Uh, that now that his price is up to 7,400 and he's priced next to some other pitchers and slightly lower than guys that have no limit at all. That's my concern. I like this. I think this matchup lines up well for a guy that has some reverse splits, but I just don't like the fact that I can't rely. I can't even. I don't even have an outside chance of Berea throwing 100 pitches, even if he's on point like he was last time out against the Rangers.
Yeah, that's a fair point for sure.
Anything else on this? Well, I will say Mike Trout. If you like Mike Trout, as everyone should, Mike Trout's a good play here against Mike Miner. Mike Miner's been a lot better lately, but it's Mike Trout. So yeah, is that it for you on this game? Anybody else in terms of bats you like?
Nope.
All right, let's get to the last one. Atlanta, San Francisco. Sean Newcomb. He's going to be popular, and I think for good reason. This is a good spot for Newcomb. It'd be tough to argue that. It's not a good Giants team. They no longer even have Andrew McCutchen. The bottom half of their lineup are names that not, I would say, more than the casual fan. I won't say the avid baseball fan, but a guy that watches games like every night probably wouldn't know who most of them are. And that's what Newcomb's going to face now. Walks have been a huge issue for him. There's no denying that. The guy's walk rate is through the roof, not just through this recent rough stretch, but for the season. But the Giants don't walk, Adam. So I'm curious to get your take on Sean Newcomb, because I do think it is a very good spot on the surface.
Yeah, I think it's a very good spot too. Me going underweight on him doesn't have anything to do with the spot. It just has to do with the number of pitchers around him at virtually no ownership, and the fact that he is going to be one of the highest owned pitchers on the slate. When he is a volatile pitcher, he does have a very wide range of outcomes, as we've seen recently. Josh actually on the show this morning went back through his last 10 games or so on DraftKings, and he had like a couple 30-point games, and he had several games in the single digits, and it doesn't really matter a ton what the matchup is. He has a ceiling, but he also is just very capable of not throwing strikes, getting behind in counts. He's not a really high strikeout guy anyway. Against right-handed hitters this year, he's between like 20 and 22%. strikeout percentages, 11% walk percentage. He had 20.4% strikeouts, 11.9% walk percentage against righties. He's good at limiting damage, but he's just not someone that I really like playing at high ownership because he does have the ability to put a ton of guys on base and to have a poor start. But also the added base runners on DraftKings and fantasy draft in particular kind of lower his ceiling, or at least the likelihood of him reaching his ceiling, because it drives up the pitch count. You lose points, obviously. So it's just a spot where if he's going to be, one of the higher owned pitchers on the slate, I can kind of take a lot of that ownership, spread it out to other pitchers in that price range that aren't going to have much ownership, and take a stand on a few guys against Newcomb.
All right, I think that's pretty fair. Would you play in cash games? Would you have cash game? Or would you have Sean Newcomb?
No, I would have Giolito.
You would have Giolito and Corey Kluber.
Well, I haven't made a cash lineup, so assuming the money gets me something. Like if I can play Sean Newcomb and it doesn't cost me any hitters, then yeah, I would play Newcomb. But if I can get like Blackman and Trout and, I guess in cash games you probably would want Stanton maybe. Then I would be fine.
Let me read a comment to you. B Twice 80 in Slack says, "Ship my money, Laffy. Never seen such polar opposite takes on a slate overview. Your former colleague called it a super thin pitching slate." I won't reference the name. He didn't give us a name, so I don't even know who it is. But I think this is the furthest thing from a super thin pitching slate.
Yeah, I wish I could roster only pitchers.
Kluber, Marquez, Junis, Godley. You want to throw him in there? Gibson. You throw J.A. Happ's in a decent spot. Trevor Williams, I don't want to play him, but he's not in a terrible spot. Newcomb, Giolito, Arrieta's going to be played. There's double-digit pitcher.
There's not a single pitcher on the slate that if he was in a winning tournament lineup tonight, I'd say, like, how did they land on that guy? Except for Diego Castillo.
And Jacob deGrom.
Well, pitcher that's pitching.
I know, I'm joking. Yeah, no, there's nobody. Exactly. Not a thin pitching slate whatsoever. I think we've done our best to illustrate that throughout the show. And some of these guys that we might not be high on, a lot of it's just because of ownership. Like Arrieta could have a good game, but I just don't think he's ever going to kill me if I don't play him. I think
that's my take on Newcomb also.
I was going to say, you can make the same argument for Newcomb. It's not often because he labors through games, man. He is not an efficient pitcher. So I know he came like an out shy of getting the no-hitter like a month or so ago. But aside from that, Newcomb's lucky to get through 6 innings, Adam, in all seriousness.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it's just, you mentioned it, the fact that him and Arrieta both, they certainly have ceilings, but they just don't hit them all that often. And if they're going to be, 40 to 50% owned combined, then I would rather, instead of just going with the field on that, I would just rather take a lot of that ownership and then spread it out to guys like Zach Godley, who has just as high of a ceiling as either of them at lower ownership. Wade Miley, who serves as somewhat of a leverage play and I think has a higher ceiling than people are going to give him credit for. Kyle Gibson, who works as a leverage play. Like, it lets me just get more of those guys that nobody's playing.
Yeah, Rodney Swerve says, Laffy, Adam, just play Gibson. Rodney, I don't know if you were with FanVice before or you're an awesemo.com guy and started watching the show once we came over, but just play Gibson has been my motto for way too long, and it has not done me a lot of favors. That said, I'm probably just going to play Gibson in some lineups because he has a legitimate upside, man. And I think the Yankees total is a little bit overblown. Any hitters from this last San Francisco-Atlanta game?
As much as I want to stack San Francisco for the leverage, I still just they're bad, man.
Yeah,
so
they're real bad.
Yeah, no. Derek Rodriguez is a pretty decent pitcher too. Terrible park, 60 degrees. I don't see me having much of this game.
Yeah, I'll pass as well. All right, we'll hit our positions and stacks. This should be fun. And then we'll turn it over to Jake and Chris. They're going to lead you up to lock. Top pitchers, only give me 4, not 11.
Okay, Corey Kluber, Lucas Giolito. I already forgot who else I really like. No, Marquez and I guess Godley.
Yeah, Kluber, Giolito, um, Marquez, and I'll throw. Here we go. I'll throw some Gibson in there, but obviously Newcomb I do think is a good play. I just don't like Arrieta and Newcomb. I don't hate the fade because these guys generally are not going to kill you if you fade them.
Right.
Catcher, give me Wilson Ramos. I'll begrudgingly throw a little Tony Walters in there if I have to. Um, God, maybe even some Mitch Garver. It's ugly out there, bro. It's ugly.
Yeah, it's bad. Ramos, Gary Sanchez, and Wellington Castillo.
Oh, I knew I was forgetting someone. Gary Sanchez is too cheap. Absolutely too cheap. Good call. First base.
Edwin Encarnacion, Jose Abreu, and I'll actually go ahead and throw in Freddie Freeman here because I missed that he's 4,400 on DraftKings.
All right. Give me Carlos Santana. Here's one that I don't hear a lot about today, but I still love his upside. Ryan O'Hearn. Ryan O'Hearn is destroying righties this year. And while I still think Giolito is much better than his price tag, well, O'Hearn's not a bad play here whatsoever. And then I guess we'll throw Carpenter or Adams into the mix. Second base, give me Javi Baez. I know he's shortstop on FanDuel. Descalso, I don't mind. He's got the platoon advantage over Marquez, and then really just like mixing guys in, like Forsythe or you know what? Let me backtrack. My favorite player is Whit Merrifield, just based on the stolen base upside alone. Sorry, Adam, took too long there. Go ahead.
You're good. Second base, Merrifield, Moncada, and Forsythe just for the price.
All right, third base.
Jose Ramirez, Miguel Andujar, and yeah, I guess Escobar.
All right. Yeah, give me I'll throw Escobar in there, Chris Bryant because he's cheap. And I might even play some Maikel Franco. Yeah, it's ugly out there,
I don't hate
folks.
that.
Yeah. Shortstop, Trey Turner. I really love the speed on the base paths in this matchup. The same thing goes for Mondesi. I'm just really targeting stolen bases here. And then Javi Baez on FanDuel, as I mentioned before. What about you?
Yeah, same three. I'll also throw in Francisco Lindor.
All right, outfield.
Mike Trout, Palka, Delmonico, Hoskins, Williams, Ryan Braun, Blackman, Dahl.
All right. Yeah. Just give me a bunch of Reese Hoskins, Braun. I'll throw Nick Williams in there. Delmonico's super cheap if you need him. Give me your stacks. I know we're not super high on anyone, but just throw them out there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really spreading out my exposure to stacks here and just trying to cover as many bases with pitching I want as I can. But White Sox, Yankees skipping Stanton, Kansas City, Colorado, Philadelphia, Washington.
All right. Yeah. Philadelphia, Washington too. Cubs because I just think some of these guys are too cheap. And on the other, I just want to say this Giolito Junis game, like both have looked much better, but I wouldn't be surprised if either one of the White Sox or the Royals won a tournament tonight. I really wouldn't. I guess that's it. And obviously Coors just because it's Coors, but not a Coors game that I'm particularly high on. We'll get to just one question. Answer it quickly, Adam. I want to turn this over to Jake and Chris. Sam asks, Kluber's going against the hottest team on the slate by way of the Rays. Do you think Kluber will cool them? Well, Kluber cooled this hot Rays team off 2 starts ago with like 10 strikeouts, but you can answer.
Yeah, I think Kluber is better than the Rays.
Yeah, so do I. 7 scoreless, 8 strikeouts. He faced him less than 2 weeks ago. Better pitcher than this team is. All right. Thanks for hanging out with us. It's the Deeper Dive. We'll see you back here tomorrow, hopefully for a much better slate. Jake, Chris, coming up next, taking you up to 7:05 lock here on Monday night. Good luck tonight.